welcome. This is a big moment and a big vision for us. So you are here to really help craft and inform the long-range growth, development, sustainability, livability of our city. We want you to take this time. We're going to bring back to you a number of ideas that we're sort of halfway through this process. We started this process back in May of this year, sort of a soft start. Dara Brightman, who's very shy but is somewhere in the back, has probably been to barbecues and community gatherings and open streets and living rooms and all kinds of things in your many neighborhoods throughout the summer and the fall, and other staff from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, really hearing from you where are the places that you want to go to? Where are the places that you want to connect to? Even more importantly than you, which you are all very important, where do your kids and grandkids going to want to go and live and travel and be in Pittsburgh? So transportation projects take a very, very long time to come into being. And once they're gone, they're very difficult to reinstate. And so part of what this 2070 plan is about is really taking that audacious look into the long-term future, thinking about the kind of city that we want to be in, the quality of life that we're going to have for our children and for others who come to join us from other parts of the country. How are we going to move them? How are we going to achieve the livability goals that we have in the city? How are we going to make sure that this is an inclusive place so that it is of Pittsburghers, by Pittsburghers, for Pittsburghers, and those who come behind us so that we can rebuild this city? It is also about the near term. How do we make decisions right now about what happens with these many land development sites that we have? How do we re-envision the management of our streets? What do we think about new technologies as they're coming to our city? What do we need to preserve from the railways that are there, the park spaces that are around us? What are the investments? What are the lasting, enduring investments that we need to start to make now that will form that basis that we continue to build on and build on and build on? For example, sidewalks. I truly believe they are never going to go out of style, so we can just keep investing in those forever. So we'll go through a brief presentation, and then Mayor Peduto will be here to join us, and I hope really inspire us to think about what are those things that we need to capture. How is this plan meaningful? How do you participate in it? And what is this city that we're looking to build? So the 27 Mobility Vision Plan is an opportunity for bold and proactive thinking about the future of Pittsburgh so that we can identify the connections and policies that we need to ensure that in a growing city, all residents will have the physical mobility they need to reach the economic mobility they seek, which really is the mission of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. One of the things that really inspires us, I don't want to ramble too long, but I really look to a study that was done by Harvard University in 2015, where they determined that the single most important factor in economic success, the single most important factor for families being able to escape poverty, was not necessarily the quality of the schools or the crime rates in the neighborhoods. It was how long does it take them to get to opportunity? How long is that travel time? How reliable is that travel time? In the Pittsburgh region, the average commute in this area is 23 minutes to get to jobs. So region-wide, 23 minutes, unless you travel by transit, in which case your commute is 78 minutes one way. So that's where we're at today. And you can imagine what is the condition that's happening with communities that are not able to have that private automobile, are not able to access opportunity. Are they going to thrive and grow and sustain and be with us and be part of this community that we're building in the future if we don't provide alternative modes to get around and better connections to the areas of opportunity that we have? The department, this vision, this future that we're building, for us is driven by 5 principles that we really come back to. They're really our grounding force for the department. First and foremost is that nobody should die simply traveling to get where they're going. So Vision Zero, no deaths on our roadways. This shouldn't be something that is unachievable. This is something that we need to really take to heart and work very hard to achieve that. So for us, one of the measures that we think about in that is, are our streets and intersections and trails and networks navigable by an adolescent child? My daughter just turned 13 yesterday. Do I feel, and all of you who have 13-year-olds that you love, do we all feel confident that you can put that child out in the world of Pittsburgh and that they will be able to safely travel on that roadway, safely get across that intersection, safely get to middle school, safely get where they're going because of the way that we've designed our streets, because of the way that we operate our streets? If we can pass that test, we can achieve this goal of no deaths on our city streets. The second principle is that we believe that every resident in the city should be able to access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home, and they don't need a private automobile to do it. So this is sort of the ice cream test, right? Can you get to the grocery store and get back home before the ice cream melts and not have to rely on a private vehicle? Again, this is something we should be able to achieve in a city our size. It should be something that's an expectation for all of our residents. How do we build these networks? How do we build this city that can achieve that very basic piece? Because if we can do that, they can get to parks, and they can get to jobs, and they can get to high quality education, and they can get to all the other great amenities that we have here. Third is that all trips less than a mile are easy and enjoyable to accomplish by non-driving means, preferably by walking, biking, or other micro-mobility connections. So currently today, 25% of automobile trips taken within the city of Pittsburgh are driven in an automobile. 25% of the trips that you see taken around you on your roadways, those people that you're cursing in front of you, are driving less than a mile in their automobile. How do we change that? How do we create attractive streets, easy services, other ways to get around so that we can really move those things into more sustainable modes of transportation, so that we can save our air quality, so that we can save our roadways, so that we can create more roadway capacity for those longer distance trips that are really hard to do by other means. Fourth, that no household in our city needs to spend a combined cost of 45% of their income on housing, transportation, and energy costs. In Pittsburgh, we're doing pretty, and that is true for any income quintile. So right now, on average in Pittsburgh, folks here spend about 14% of their income on housing, and 14% of their income on transportation, and 15% of their income on housing, and about 2% of their income on energy. We're meeting this threshold on average, but to have housing costs that are less than 15% of your household income is a rarity in this country. And it's not necessarily something that we can sustain and count on. The converse of that is to have transportation costs that are 14% of your income is also a rarity and not a good one. So what do we do to drive down transportation costs so that people have more left, so that they can have more housing, so that they can pay for the energy costs that we have? This equation works on both ends. And then finally, that our streets and our services reflect the values of our city. So we're a city of neighborhoods, we're a city of neighbors, we're a city that attests that we love one another, but I've been out on some of those streets that are a little less than loving. So how do we really think about the way that we design our streets so that it reflects what we see ourselves as in our mind's eye, so that we're really telling the story of Pittsburgh. What this plan is for, this is the population trajectory of Pittsburgh. This is where we've been. We hit sort of our high in the 40s and 50s when we were a city approaching 700,000, and you all know the story better than I do of how we plummeted, now topping just over 300,000. There's good news, which is that we're starting to see those population numbers go in the other direction. So we're starting to regrow that tax base so that we can invest in better schools, so we can invest in better parks, so that we can invest in maintenance of our infrastructure. And we're starting to see that growth happen, but we need to not be caught unaware of it. What happens, let's think about it, what happens if we grow back just half the population that we lost? Do you believe with me that in 50 years we might be able to get back halfway to where we once achieved. Well, if we do that, that's 150,000 more people that are coming in the 58 square miles of our city. How are we going to move them? Probably not the way that we're moving today. How are we going to travel? How are we going to get them to jobs and groceries and elementary schools and all of the other places that they're going to go? Along with that population growth comes employment growth, we hope. How do we get 50,000 more people, 100,000 more people to their jobs here from the surrounding region? If the city's growing, the region is growing as well. Wonderful. How do we move at that scale, and how do we provide that accommodation here in the narrow rights of way that we have in the city, where we hope to remain the economic center of the region, but we can only do that if we can get people to those jobs and back again. So part of what this plan is looking back to look forward, right? What did we have here as a city? What was that infrastructure that helped support that high population? And people have said in these community meetings and the church basements that we've been to, 1950s wasn't all that rosy. So let's not put those rose-colored glasses on to imagine that that was a perfect community. There were things that didn't go so well then. So let's not replicate those mistakes, but think about where we're going to go forward. We've looked at, what is that infrastructure that we had back, when we had the trolleys and the streetcars and the railways what are those visions and those contemplations that really never materialized, like Skybus. I don't know, any of you know the sort of story of Skybus, right? But it was an idea, and there was a notion, and there was a demand behind that we can still learn from, of what were those connections that they were trying to make, and what was the notion behind that. What did we do with these sort of, the Pittsburgh that was never built, right? This tri-layer bridge coming off of Point Park that was not Frederick Law Olmsted, I get my architects wrong. Thank you, Frank Lloyd Wright. Contemplation of what might have happened at Point Park. And so can we learn again, what was that inspiration? What were they reaching toward? Can we draw from that? And there's some great, newspapers from the 1959 to look at to see what were we thinking about then? And does any of it have merit for us to take forward into the future? How do we build from some of the things that are being contemplated now from our major development sites and sort of the connections that they're striving to make, from the neighborhood plans that many of you have worked on and the transportation connections that are in there, from the regional plans, the SPC and the Regional Transportation Alliance and Port Authority and the Allegheny County have all been working on at different scales throughout the city. How do we draw those elements from those different plans and aggregate them into one picture for our city, this sort of system of systems that we want to maintain? Where does this plan sort of fall in that family of plans that's going on? So we're the city. We're sort of that mid-range level right there. So we have the large 10-county regional visions. We have the nearer in commuting region kinds of visions. We have these precious 58 square miles and the 1,000 miles of roadway that we're responsible for here in the city. We then have neighborhood plans and sub-area plans that go on, and then we have development sites. How do all of these things work together and iterate on each other so that we can aggregate up and disaggregate down to a real plan? So the framework that we're going to talk about from all of these community meetings that we've had, from all of the input that you've been gathering, there's a wiki map. We've had 900 separate, probably more than that at this point, 900 separate pieces of information kind of provided in that, people interacting with that plan. But we're looking at it then at a range of scales, and that's what we really want you to kind of think about at these different scales. What does it mean for the city? So we're trying to take this down from just being a sort of abstract notion out there to what kinds of decisions do we make for the city in the near term and in the long term to prepare for these. So the themes that are emerging, how do we connect to the world? We're one little small place in Western Pennsylvania. There's a larger mega economy around us that for our ability to thrive, we need to connect to those places. How do we do that, and what is the role there? How do we connect to the commute shed region around us? Those communities that we have codependencies with. How do we manage our rights of way? How do we prepare sites within our city to facilitate those connections? How do we connect the centers within our city and the emerging centers that will come when we have this additional population growth, centers that might not exist now or existed in the past that we're now regenerating today? What are the districts that we need to connect and provide better circulation within, taking it down, again, a further step? And then how do we manage the street, and how do we manage change? How does all of this prepare us for those vast unknowns, the things that are still yet to come? Again, I just want to bring us back again from these sort of high-level things to these principles. This is about life, everyday life, being able to live safely, access those places that you need to get to, enjoy your time in the city, remain affordable and inclusive, really exhibit the kinds of places that we want to be. So keeping it back to those principles. Some of the themes that, when you go back to these boards and you take the sticky notes or you take the comment cards or you take the digital engagement kinds of things, some of these themes that we want you to bring back into, I didn't say, here we are at the state of themes and sort of the initial kind of draft chapters of what this vision plan is going to be. I want you to contemplate it. There's big ideas here. There's things that you need to chew over. I do my best thinking about, just before I fall asleep. You'll need to do that too. Bring that information back to us after this meeting, in the weeks following this. Tell your neighbors. Talk about it, in your various meetings. But what we want to do is take this framework, have you plug in still more inputs into that, and we want to come back out to you in February with a picture of what this system of systems, what this network for the future of our city really looks like, and then again, take several weeks after that to get more input. So that's what we're driving toward, is a mid-February release of this. So the first thing, connecting to the world, our growth and prosperity, we are not an island. Our growth and prosperity depends on our ability to get, in particular, to those near-in cities, those near-in economies that are just a little bit too far to drive, or you're really you're really making a commitment to drive to them, but they're really just not far enough to justify that flight from Pittsburgh International Airport. There's a number of different technologies that have been proposed that are there. And this is not, by the way, about picking the technology, right? I don't know what's going to come, and Pittsburgh is not going to build a Hyperloop. But, Hyperloop is out there. It's a technology that might be available. The question we need to answer is, what do we do with that technology? Does it come into Pittsburgh? Does it come into the city somewhere? These are tubes that are 20 feet in diameter. Does this come into the center of downtown Pittsburgh, or does it dock? Does it have a terminal someplace just outside the city? Do we prepare any sites here that we really want to think about that being that international, perhaps that near-in national port for us? It's probably not going to be the Pennsylvanian right downtown, because I don't see that going through the middle of the Golden Triangle. But where are those places where it might be, and what is that tertiary capillary network that we need to start thinking about that would then enable you to disembark from your rapid pneumatic tube that shoots you to Chicago in 40 minutes, but getting out of that in, Chateau, Hazelwood Green, South Hills. I don't know where it is, but can you get out of it in one of those locations and get to Oakland or Homewood or Penn Hills or wherever that might be? What is that connecting network that we need to have on the land side of these things? So where do we have something like that here in the city? And if so, where? And what is the connections that then go from that? So those are the things I want you to really contemplate. So connecting the region, again, we're a regional economy. Our workforce goes outside the city, and workers from outside the city come in. And it's very important to us that we continue to do that, and that people can take advantage of those opportunities wherever they might be. But how, and goods delivery and goods movement, how do we do that? So how in a growing city are we going to do that? What are the kind of tools that we want to kind of put pins in that map to think about? Are there park and ride facilities? Are you riding on transit? Are you riding on trails? Maybe it's both. Where are those that you might intercept some of those vehicles so they're not penetrating into the most congested areas of our city. Where might they be? How do we think about managed lanes and where managed lanes might go? So bus-only lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes. Might there be rideshare only or autonomous vehicle or whatever it is, but what might those lane allocations be in the very narrow rights of way that we have and the precious few streets that we have? How do we preserve the railway assets that we have in our region so that we're not foreclosing the opportunity for regional rail or other kinds of things that might use those rail rights of way, because rail rights of way in particular, once they're gone, they're gone. And it's very hard to reestablish those. So thinking about what those tools are and importantly, where do they stop in our city and what is the network that serves them? If there's a park and ride lot, that does mean that there's some sizable roadways going to and from that vast parking facility. That's okay, we need to think carefully about where we put that, but we also have to think about the consequences of what happens in that area. When we get inside the city, how do we connect these multiple centers that we have and multiple centers that will be? We're seeing tremendous growth in the Strip District. We hope that we'll see sizable growth and regeneration in the Hill and in Homewood and in, we've seen East Liberty already down in Lincoln Park, in different parts of the city, not all of which are really well connected. There's few ways to get in and out some of these places. So those centers, it is a chicken and an egg kind of thing that any of the developers in the room will tell you. It's very difficult to bring those kinds of activities to a place that is not connected now. And if we do, we may find that it's a very auto-oriented kind of approach. So how do we connect these centers? How do we make those connections that we're missing or difficult because we've got hills and valleys and waterways and other kinds of things? So how do we think about technologies like, of course, our bike network and really building out that as an alternative to move between these centers? Do water taxis have a future for us so that we can cross those rivers and not have to get on the roadway network at all? What do we do about freight? Do we think about restoring and reestablishing some of our 22 inclines that used to be here in the city? Or do we think about modern versions of that incline technology like gondolas, aerial ropeway transit? How do we do that here in our city? More trails, more kinds of shared mobility options and vehicles. So again, really kind of thinking about those things. What about these sort of mega neighborhoods, places where there's multiple neighborhoods that sort of string together into centers? So those would be places like the North Side, where you have emerging developments happening in the Chateau area. You have Nova Place, you have Deutschtown, you have quite a lot of economic strength there, but it's a little bit far to walk. What are the ways that we can connect those centers in that sort of sub-market that's there? Do we talk about things like circulator transit? Do we talk about these new kinds of micromobility that are emerging around the city, and how do we accommodate them and where do they travel? Walk accelerators, I would call them. So I walk at 4 miles an hour. I can hop on one of these things and go at 12 miles an hour. That cuts my travel time by a third. Do we start thinking again about streetcars or other kinds of things that are perhaps not great for the really long haul transit, but work very, very effectively for shorter term? Where are those places? What are the connections that are needed? How do we really start anticipating those kinds of investments? And in some respects, this is just by putting it down on paper, just by putting our flag in the ground and saying this is what Pittsburgh wants, this is where we start to see some of these things actually starting to emerge. And then bringing it down to the level of managing the street. So really now at the very tactical level, what is happening at our curbsides? What are we doing to really manage those spaces? Street trees and sidewalks and public stairs and all of those things that are really at the very, very tactical level, really more on a policy level. What are those policies that we need to generate so that we can manage these rights of way that we have? We talk about travel speeds. What do we do about data collection in this era of big data? How do we collect it? What are we using it for? and how does that help us manage this precious right-of-way that we have a little bit more. And then really, finally, sort of, one chapter of this has got to be about that unknown. We're in a time of rapid disruption in the transportation industry. How do we make ourselves resilient for the future? How do we put, where does fiber, high-speed fiber, factor into the rights of way and the management of our streets? How do we think about green infrastructure and stormwater and management of those impervious surfaces? Because we do, all signs point to climate change is real. What do we do in an area when there will be more rainfall, when some of those travel corridors that we rely on right now, like Route 51, become significantly less reliable? How are we going to build that resiliency in? How are we going to evaluate and consider new technologies and new management things? This is partly about, again, bringing ourselves back to these really fundamental principles, so that when some flashy, new, sexy, wonderful thing comes at us and is going to be the thing that is going to be wonderful for Pittsburgh again, can we stack it up next to these fundamental principles, or the principles that you help create, and really then evaluate how we're going to react to that, and where does that new emerging piece of it fit into this large plan that we have? How does it fit into the future that we've defined for ourselves? So with that, Mayor Peduto has arrived, so I'm going to let you say some words, if you will, about what is this future? Why can we feel confident to think bold and big? And really, why do we have to? So, Mayor?
Thank you. Welcome to the first meeting of Skybus. We're bringing it back. I remember the 70s. I remember going to South Park for the Allegheny County Fair and being able to see Skybus in action and being like, this area is going to get the latest and the greatest of transportation. And then it was the spine line. Remember the spine line, guys? And we were going to build out transit to the north and to the south and to the east and the west. And we ended up with the channel. So we did end up with some extension of public transportation. But we've lacked that vision. What is it that we are trying to get to? And it's not our job. I mean, we're the city of Pittsburgh, right? We're just this little peanut in this whole big region. But we're also the economic heart of this entire region. We're also the place when people need care, where they come to. We're also that place when people are looking for education, that they come to this city. When they're looking for all of the different types of services that they need, not just to survive, but to thrive, they look to the city of Pittsburgh. And so we have to look internally and be able to say, how do we improve accessibility for all? How do we do it through all the different types of modes that exist today and may exist tomorrow? And what are we planning and what are we doing to build towards that in the next year, and the next year, and the next year? And that's really the opportunity that we have today. So go back, 1940s, David Lawrence is knocking everything down. He's creating all these big roads for the automobile because Mr. Ford said that everyone's going to have 2 cars in a garage. And so we're building bridges and blasting through hillsides and building tunnels. And we create the Pittsburgh Parking Authority. All of our mobility ideas and questions are answered. We will park cars in garages. Now it's a little bit different. Not everybody has a car. And people are reliant upon public transportation. Some people have needs that need to be met, and through technology can make life much more accessible and better. And instead of thinking, how do we improve a Pittsburgh parking authority, what not about thinking about how do we create a Pittsburgh mobility authority so that all of the different ideas of transportation can help to be funded through an organization like the Parking Authority, but expanding its role to be able to make sure that every neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh is accessible. Every neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh, you can get to where you need to get to in the most efficient, effective, and equitable way possible. No neighborhood in Pittsburgh is left behind because of roads that were designed in the 19th century. No part of Pittsburgh is cut off because it had been cut off because of heavy industry that had been built before. But every neighborhood has access to all the wonderful amenities that this city has to offer. And then challenge our friends in Allegheny County to expand upon that, and the people of southwestern Pennsylvania to expand upon that. Now, we can wait for a great plan like Skybus to come back for this entire region, or we can get to work right now and understand what each of our neighborhoods need, what each of our communities need, and the different ways of getting from point A to point B, and start to come up with some concrete ways that we build towards that starting today. So this plan goes into effect this year. This isn't something that we're looking to spend the next 2 years talking about. We want to get your ideas into it now so that we have the opportunity to discuss it before the next budget comes out, and to talk about the priorities of where we need to be and what we need to be doing over the course of the next 50 years. 50 years is a long journey that will go like that. And 50 years ago, it was not really thought about other than, for the most part, buses and cars. Today, we have a lot of different ways of being able to transport people in cities being utilized around the world, and ideas that haven't even come up or been discussed yet. And we need to be able to start thinking how we design the city so we have the capacity to do that. Because we can design a city and we can limit our ability, or we can design a city and we can create opportunity. And I hope that we would choose the second. I was just looking over, James, what's the headline on the second paper? Monorail. I always think of the Simpsons episode when I think about monorail. What are the ideas? Nothing's off the table. Everything is an open idea, and we start this out with a blank page. So very interested in getting your input onto this. I ask you to stay committed. It is such a great sign to see a room that is standing room only for an issue that talks about what should we be doing for the next 50 years. So I appreciate the interest. Show of hands, how many people are from the west end of the city of Pittsburgh? West end. 1, 2, 3, a few. East end. Quite a few. North side. Good number. South? Okay, we need more West Enders. West Siders. So other than that, it looks like we have great diversity between age, between community. Hopefully every other part of Pittsburgh is being represented. Just need some more West Siders. So we'll work with that. We'll work with Teresa as well. Director, thank you. I don't know if you know how blessed we are to have Karina as the director. Yeah. She not only has a great background in public administration, serving as the Deputy Director of Washington, D.C.'s Department of Transportation. She also has world experience working within the private sector and being a consultant and advisor to cities all over the world when it comes to mobility. She was strongly recommended by Gabe Klein to be the person to create the new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And where I lean on her is not only as an expert in transportation, but as an expert planner. And as every planner knows, you start from the community and you work the way up. And having somebody in that position who understands that has been absolutely critical to all of the success we've had these past few years. Thank you for making Pittsburgh your home.
Thank you. Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Yeah, but more important than my resume is that we were talking with my kids. We've been here two and a half years. Now my kids are native Washingtonians, which if you're from Washington, D.C., you know like how special that is to be able to claim that you're a native Washingtonian. And I said so, and I grew up in Michigan, and we spend a lot of time in Michigan, and I said, to my kids, so are you Washingtonians or Pittsburghers? And they're like, we're Pittsburghers. So we're like all in for the next 2 generations, I guess. So I have a stake in this too. Thank you. I hope you're inspired. I want you to be inspired. I want you to really think boldly. I want you to be pragmatic and practical too, because this is about how we build the 2021 capital budget and those decisions that we make about this development plan and that roadway restriping that we're going to make this year. But it's also about thinking about how that incrementally adds up to this very long vision. So your assignment, we're not going to do comments because it's a big group, and I really want you to take some of your things back here. Your assignment and why we wanted you here is to be that small pebble that starts the great snowball kind of effect. I want you to take what you've heard here, hopefully the energy that you've heard here. I want you to bring that information back to your communities. We'll be there too. City planning will be there. DOMI will be there. Anyone who you ask who's in the public service will come with you. We'll make these materials available to you. But we want you to really start those conversations about what are those connections that your neighborhood needs, yes, today, but also remember, many of these we're not going to be able to deliver for another 20 years, likely. So how do we set that framework for that generation that comes behind us? How do we create a sustainable, inclusive city for those? Take this information, have those conversations, bring that information back into this process so that when we reconvene in February, and you're able to see that vision and you're able to see that plan, you're also able to see your signature on it. That piece that your community brought into this process, the connection that is really going to be vital for the long-term vitality of your neighborhood, the way that we're going to manage our streets so that they're places that you're proud of and that you feel comfortable and that you feel are your streets for your needs, those places that are going to help us grow as a region and bring in the kinds of development that we want and need to be that future city, but that it doesn't necessarily have to be accompanied by crushing congestion and other kinds of things that will really stymie that future that we want to see. We have a fantastic graphic facilitator who's been at all of our meetings, who really is capturing some of that dialogue. So maybe we will just have some reactions from folks who want to offer those, but then want you to take the sticky notes, leave thoughts that have popped into your mind here, but also really chew this over, bring it back to your communities, and bring that information back into the process. So I don't know if anyone wants to just offer thoughts, reactions, statements, or if you're just like, it's 7 o'clock and I'd like to do something else. Sure.
What occurs to me when we talk about 50-year plan, it seems really simple, but maybe I'm just naive. In 50 years, you could build a light rail system, or maybe light rail combined with bus rapid transit, which makes, provides mobility as a right for everyone if you build it such that it's really comprehensive enough that it touches every neighborhood and microhood. So maybe, is that too simple or not? We didn't talk about light rail bunch here.
I would say submit it as an idea. It is, as I said, we've had like 900 comments and we reviewed a number of plans. So those ideas are in there, but still I want you to put that in there and I want you to make that something that kind of gets folded into that. And if you can, I would urge you to be a little bit more specific. Where, how, light rail for what are we connecting? What do you want to see there?
I have a comment just sort of generally speaking, and it's, we're talking about these new technologies and things we can build in 50 years' time, when it really feels like, as a resident, and perhaps this is because there's someone here from Port Authority, because Port Authority and DOMI are these two separate entities. I mean, why can't we just increase the bus service on the streets we have today? It's a far less expensive option, reduce car traffic. I mean, there's ways to reduce cities all over the world, for example, central London. I mean, I'm not saying we're like London, but you can't drive. There's ways to reduce car traffic and back it up with increased bus service. So literally, it is easier, more convenient to just walk out of your house down to your main street, and then you can have accommodations for people with special needs. But we're not doing that today. So why? So I don't, these big plans for the future, I'm a little skeptical. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Other comments? Anything?
Thank you. Just want to thank you. I'm Hannah. I'm from the Forbes Fund. So I want to talk a little bit professionally, but then personally. So I guess I'll start professional. I'm really excited about the community engagement work that you spoke about. Since this is a long-term plan, I really want to think about how we engage teenagers and then young teens too, perhaps because I also worry about my kids' safety, and then thinking about the places that they're going to want to go to receive teenage resources and education resources that are kind of out of their specific neighborhood. So really engaging that younger age group. And then also as a resident, so I live in Carrick. I'm really thankful for the speed bumps that have been put in our neighborhood, but thinking about advocacy for residents and how my husband and I, we were open to funding the speed humps, but we didn't know how to do that or what we needed to advocate for ourselves. So thinking about transportation and then advocacy at the resident level too. So thank you for your work. I'm really excited to be here and happy to hear. But those two issues is what really stood out for me. I thought I saw a hand. Yeah, I'll let him go.
Well, first of all, thank you for holding this event, and thank you for soliciting the feedback from the city and the community. Just briefly, I would say that none of these mobility principles here and none of all these interesting, fantastic, all kinds of ideas are possible if, for the sake of the worker trying to get to their job, for the child trying to get to school, for the elderly person trying to get down the street to their family, for the person of limited mobility who may have a number of challenges without quality sidewalks.
I just want to piggyback off of a couple of things that have already been said. We have a community in many areas where we have taken transportation away. And these people have to walk a mile down a hill or up a hill to get to a bus. And the bus isn't always the nicest place to get on, depending on that bus driver that day. I live down the street from the Wilkinsburg Park and Ride. And Park and Ride, Pat Authority needs to look at their Park and Ride. You've got people parking across the sidewalk area. That's for wheelchair people. You've got a filthy Park and Ride. On the weekend, it looks terrible. Send somebody out to clean it up. Yes, I know we've got to go forward. And I'm not going to be here 50 years from now. But at the same time, we need to go forward and think of all populations within the city and the suburbs that we keep moving low-income people out of the city limits. And these people can't get to their jobs. So we need to think wholeheartedly about what we're going to produce. Because if we don't, the city's going to get wider and wider and more high income. It's going to be terrible.
Is anybody over? Any other comments? We'll take maybe three or four more, and then I do want you to put some of these notions down in sort of your own words in these different boards.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
just for my take from being here for under 2 years, and I also put it in my comment card, have we looked at other programs in other cities around us? One of the biggest things that I find challenging just being here and listening to so many people, I live in Penn Hills, is that we talk about it, but then this is all great, but at the end of the day, I think I also want to piggyback off of some of the other people who were talking, the sidewalks, lighting. And I actually parked in Wilkinsburg today just to take the bus here, and it was easy. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm 51 years old, and I say to myself, a person who's handicapped, they can't do that. So we have to be innovative, but at the same time, we also have to see what's working in other cities. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, we're behind here in Pittsburgh. And I've talked to a lot of people who have came here as business partners, like, why won't you bring your business here? The biggest thing, so this is a great start. But the biggest thing they said is, first of all, we have a lot of people who, and as I was telling these ladies, live in Chicago, Illinois, they live in Philadelphia, and their transit, they can get from A to B quick. Here we can't. I agree with some of the other people. I see people walking for miles. In Columbus, Ohio, you know, there are sidewalks, and I understand this is a different city. But if we're going to put this, paper and stuff is all great. But we have to bite off what we can chew small. But if we're going to be innovative here, we have to, first of all, get this transportation right. Businesses that I've talked to, they don't want to come here yet because this is a big issue. If they have people who want to move here from Chicago or New York, they don't want to move here because of their employees don't have cars. So we have to constantly be innovative, but if we got to be innovative, before we do anything else, we got to get this right. That's just my opinion on being here 2 years, and I'm like, why are we in Pittsburgh behind? We're behind in so much here, and but I want to make a difference, so this is why I came today. But I agree with some of the ladies here. The walking, people walk miles, and it's a challenge. Thank you.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And these are the things that, and why we've scaled it from the very basic level of the street, things like the sidewalk, and making sure that is the first foundation that we're working on, and then how do you scale it up from there? Pittsburgh, again, I came from Washington, D.C. One of the very first two things that immediately shocked me. One, sidewalks are not to park on. I just want to put that out there. It's not okay. Don't park on the sidewalks. But it was truly shocking to me that you would park on the sidewalk. Secondly, is that sidewalks are the private property owner's responsibility. This is something that, again, getting it into a plan like this to really say, you know, fundamental priority for all of these other things that we layer on top of this is to really rethink that basic foundation that you have here. What are we going to do about that? How is that in the work plan of my department or elsewhere in the city to rethink that responsibility for that basic pedestrian network?
So the sidewalk is the responsibility of the private property owner, but that same private property owner parks their car on a public street. And I live in Oakland. 75% of the commuters that come into Oakland, and there are tens of thousands of them every day, come in a single occupancy vehicle. And parking has completely destroyed Oakland over the course of my lifetime, and there is no point to having public streets serve as warehouses for private vehicles. And I woke up on January 2nd and decided that in 2020, if I do nothing else, I'm going to bust illegal parking in Oakland. So I'm letting you know you're going to be receiving an enormous stack.
Actually, Gwen is right behind you. She'll take care. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, it is one of those things. But I'm going to let David just say a couple of words, and then we'll have you really engage with some of the boards here and really think through these things. Fundamentally, and again, one of the values of doing a plan like this is I hate to break it to you all, but money does factor into some of these things. And so we have 1,000 miles of centerline streets in the city. Taking on 2,000 miles of sidewalks is something I would willingly do, but we do need to think about that extra financial burden. How are we going to justify it? Busting illegal parking and reinvesting it in sidewalks might be a really great solution to that. But those are the kinds of things that we do need to think about, is where are we making our investment decisions, near term, long term, and how does that go? And do we know that the consequences of taking on some of these burdens, quantifying what that ongoing investment that might be needed, and then thinking collectively, where do we place the value on that, and are we willing to find resources to do that investment? And I know that's going to be my segue to transit, because the same is true with transit. I'm sure David would love to run 5-minute bus service to every corner of the city, but for those resources. But the Port Authority is also getting ready to embark on a major planning effort. And as I showed you sort of those nesting dolls, this is something that nests into the foundation that they're getting ready to lay as well. So I don't know, David, if you can say just a couple words.
Sure. Thanks, Karina. So again, I'm David Huffaker from the Port Authority. And as Karina talked about, we are about to embark on our own long-range planning exercise. And one of the things that we all, Karina, the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, the Southwest Pennsylvania Commission, we're all working together. You're going to be hearing about these various initiatives, and it might appear as if they're running on top of each other. But the nesting doll analogy is actually pretty apt because we all have different geographies that we're looking at. We have different timelines that we're looking at, and we have different communities that we serve, and maybe a different view or filter on how we're viewing all of the stakeholders that we interact with. But to see a community like this come together provides some great information for Karina and her team, for us and our team, and we're going to be sharing information back and forth. And you will be hearing about some extensive outreach that will be kicking off later this month related to Port Authority. But I just want to assure you, there are a number of Port Authority staff in the room here today, and we will be out in the communities, both in Pittsburgh as well as throughout Allegheny County over the next year, doing a similar listening exercise, bouncing ideas off of each other, and hopefully building a transportation system and a mobility system that works for everyone and provides access for all. So I thank Karina for the opportunity to speak, and I'll kick the show back to her.
Wow. Well, so we'll break now, but I do want you to take the materials again. Let's keep this conversation going more and more, and bringing more and more voices into it. Again, this is about those things that we need right now today, but also I want you to keep in your mind how we get those resources for transit, how we get those resources for sidewalks, how we get those resources for other things, is we do need to grow. It is an imperative that this city start to build back that tax base, that foundation that once supported the great infrastructure that we have in the city. And so we do need to prepare for what are those things that we're going to be able to move. If we're to invite some level of regeneration, how are we going to support it? How are they going to move? So keeping your eye both on the very near term, but also preparing for this bigger thing so that we don't have more Oaklands where we devastate another neighborhood and another neighborhood because we haven't had that forethought to plan about how they're going to get to and from those communities. So with that, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this.